Okay, so we're going to move on. So we're going to look at another piece from Epigonos. It's a dying gull. It's a Roman copy of a bronze statue from 230 to 220 BCE. It's about 3.5 feet high. Okay, so this is a piece that depicts a dying Gaul. He's actually a trumpeter who has collapsed on his shield, and he's bleeding from a large gash on his chest, as you can see here. And I think his shield is under here, and then this is his trumpet here, part of his trumpet. And the expression on his face is very pained. And you can tell he's suffering, and his musculature is somewhat exaggerated. And you can see this large bulging vein in his leg. And once again, the Greeks are really depicting the enemy as being a competent foe with these two sets of sculptures, this one and this one. They're depicting the Gauls as being a competent enemy with these two statues, and they are approaching it with some empathy for these figures too. And that's something that's, Hellenistic, to have so much emotion and drama injected into the subject matter, basically. So we'll talk more about statuary. During the late classical period, the three greatest sculptors at the time were Scopas, Lysippos, and Praxiteles, who we talked about earlier when we were talking about the late classical. But they were famous for injecting more humanness into the depictions of the gods and goddesses and heroes, but Hellenistic sculptures took this even further. They redefined the range of subject matter that was considered to be appropriate in public statuary. So they're really changing the subject matter that is appropriate for public statuary during the Hellenistic. So this is actually considered to be a masterpiece of Hellenistic sculpture. This is Nike alighting on a warship from Samothrace, Greece, 190 BCE, marble, 8 feet 1 inch high. It's in the Louvre in Paris right now, but it's considered to be a masterpiece of Hellenistic sculpture. She was actually found on the island of Samothrace, and she stands on the bow of a great Greek warship, and her wings beat and her garments are swirling, and she's raising her arm to crown the naval victor. Her arm is actually missing, but she is doing that. And the sculpture contains a lot of high drama and motion. That is the characteristic of Hellenistic art. So originally the statue was set on a two-tiered fountain, and the lower basin of the fountain, there would have been some large boulders in the lower basin and in the upper basin, and then there would have been a warship with Nike on it. And the statue really would have reflected in the water of the fountain. The rushing water would have made for an auditory experience as well. And so this would have been a really dramatic piece, a lot of movement to this sculpture. And the statue interacted with the environment around it, which is kind of different from the high classical statues. The high classical statues are typically very self-contained on bare pedestals. They didn't have this kind of interactive element that this piece, Nike of Samothrace had. So that's definitely a Hellenistic quality. Okay, so this is an Aphrodite, Venus of Milo, from Melos, Greece, 150 to 125 BCE. It's marble, 6 feet 7 inches high. Alexandros of Antonich on the Meander. So during this Hellenistic time, it was not unusual to depict goddesses nude. By this point in time, it was no longer a controversy by the Hellenistic time. Hellenistic sculptors did push the envelope even further than the last classical predecessor did, which was Praxiteles, by showing more eroticism in their depictions of nude women, and in this case, Aphrodite, who was the goddess of love. Aphrodite was. And as you can see, she does have some clothing on, but her attitude is quite different. She no longer shields her pubic area with her hand, even though her arms are missing. It is thought she's just barely hanging on to her falling off drapery, and it's kind of a half-hearted attempt to keep it from slipping off completely. And this is intentionally designed to tease the viewer, and it contains a sexuality to it that was absent in the Praxiteles nude of Aphrodite that we viewed in the late classical. Hellenistic sculptors have often portrayed sleep as a subject matter. We'll move on, which is a new idea. So that suspension of consciousness and the fantasy world of dreams is kind of a Hellenistic subject matter that they explored in the Hellenistic that wasn't explored in other time periods. Let's see here. Let's move on to the Sleeping Seder here. So this is from Castel Sant'Angelo, Rome, Italy, 230 to 200 BCE, marble 7 feet 1 inches high. It's a depiction of a drunken and sleeping satyr. And he's the follower of the wine god Dionysus, so I guess it makes sense. He probably got drunk on wine. And he has obviously consumed too much. And he's thrown down a panther skin, and he's actually taking a nap on top of that. His brows are furrowed, and you can almost hear him snore if you look at him. And there's a lot of eroticism in the statue. We have seen a lot of naked men in this chapter, but none have been steeped in this amount of sexuality as this one is. And his legs are spread, and the main focus of the sculpture is on his private parts, really. Men in ancient Greece regularly practiced homosexuality, so it's not really surprising that the male sculptor chose to sexualize an image of a man. And if you look back at a lot of cultures, they did really have a huge problem. They didn't have a huge problem with homosexuality. It wasn't really until the Christians took over that homosexuality became, a big deal and became something that was under intense scrutiny. So for the Romans and the Greeks, I should say the Greeks, homosexuality was not a big deal. So, okay, we'll keep going here. Seated boxer. So the subject matter of these aren't really things that we would find in the classical, right? And the amount of eroticism and sexuality is not something we find in the classical or even in the late classical. So Hellenistic is really pushing the boundaries by injecting sexuality and also just different subject matters like sleep. And then also the seated boxer. Typically, somebody as low down on the ladder as a boxer would have never been considered for sculpture during any other time period other than the Hellenistic. This is also another one of my personal favorites from the chapter. It's kind of an old Greek theme, which is the athlete, but the Hellenistic sculptor added a bit more to it. It did away with the classical period's idealism. And this is an original bronze statue, but we don't know the name of the artist who created it. And it's thought he may have been part of a group. He was found in Rome. Obviously, that was not his original place. He would have been shown at, obviously. He would have been in Greece somewhere. And he does not possess a perfect face and body. He is kind of a defeated veteran with a disfigured face, and he gazes at the man who's just beaten him. And his powerful hands are wrapped in leather, you can see. And his body language is kind of depressed. And if you look closely, you can see his nose is broken, and so are some of his teeth. And he has cauliflower ears, and inlaid copper blood drips from the cuts on his face. They're kind of hard to see from this picture, but if we compare him to the Riese warrior from the early classical period, we can see some major differences. The Hellenistic sculpture tries to evoke compassion for the defeated and once mighty boxer that used to be in his prime, but no longer is at this time. So it has some emotion built into it. We're supposed to kind of feel some compassion and kind of feel sorry for him for being defeated, and that's kind of a Hellenistic thing too. And the fact that he's not perfect is also, a Hellenistic idea. So I guess the athlete is something that they would normally, throughout Greek history depict, but not one that's been beaten, not one that's showing signs of defeat. So that's definitely a Hellenistic thing there. Okay, so this work is actually a rare depiction of old age, and she's from the lowest rungs of the social order too. So it's an old market woman Roman copy of a marble statue, 150 to 100 BCE. It's 4 feet 1 5/8 inches high. So this is a subject matter that is definitely uniquely Hellenistic. Earlier time periods would not consider a poor old woman as an appropriate subject matter, especially for life-size statuary. But in Hellenistic times, they are exploring more ideas and more subject matters, and it's just more eclectic, and they experiment more than other times. So this haggard old woman is actually bringing chickens and a basket of fruits and veg to the market to sell, and some people think she may be bringing gifts to the god Dionysus. As you can see, her face is wrinkled, her body is bent with age, and the sculpture provides, and proves that during the Hellenistic, there was an interest in social realism that was not present in the earlier time periods. And this is basically the opposite of the beautiful, youthful sculptures we've seen from other periods of ancient Greek art. And Hellenistic art really reflects the changes in culture that had taken place during this time. Greece was a much more diverse place. It had a mixture of high-born and lower-born peoples. It became much more common to have that mixture of people. Foreigners were present in great numbers in society as well during this time. So it kind of makes sense that there's more variety in physical types being depicted in statuary at this time. And they're thought to not be true portraits as we think of a portrait today, but they're sensitive studies of different physical body types. Hellenistic artists do end up producing the true likeness of specific persons, like a true portrait eventually. In fact, this is one of the great achievements of the Hellenistic period. It's kind of the first time that this has been done in the Greek timeline, and the Hellenistic period kind of ushered in a redefinition of portraiture, rules in portraiture that were followed, still today. And, true portraits began to be made during the Hellenistic. And this is the first time in history this is done that we know of, instead of, idealistic images of only a few individual characteristics infused. So, Hellenistic sculptures begin creating accurate and true likenesses of individuals during this time period. Let me check and see. Why is this not working? Okay, we still have a little bit of time. Yeah, we'll keep moving. Polyeuctos, Demosthenes, Roman copy of a bronze original. 280 BCE, marble, 6 feet 7.5 inches high. So this is one of the first examples of true portraiture from the Hellenistic age. This is a Roman copy of original Greek's bronze made in 280, and it depicts the famous orator Demosthenes. And it was originally shown in the Athenian Agora, and it kind of shows the man that he was in life. He's rather frail, and he's kind of older. And Polyeuctos rejects Lipocino's notion that an artist must depict leaders as powerful and confident with a perfect body. He's clasping his hands. He looks nervous. He looks like he's in deep thought. His face is lined. He's balding. He shows worry in his face. And he's worried about the plight of the Greek democracy at the hands of the Macedonian king, which was Alexander's father. And he was really a great man that led rally in opposition to the Macedonian imperialism, both before and after Alexander's death. So it's clear he would, he actually was going to be captured by the Macedonians for his, rejecting them as and so he actually ended up drinking poison to end his life. And he's kind of a hero in Hellenistic times for his bravery at speaking out against the Macedonian Empire.